Good New Year's Day. My sons and I were on our way here, and I heard Caleb from the back of the van. What a great way to start the year. I agree 100%. What a great way to start the year. Jimmy, I'm not going to be calling you again tomorrow, just letting you know. We'll pick up next week. I'll start calling you next week again on the first Monday. So we're starting a new year. We've ended an old year. And if you were like me, you watched a lot of interesting football yesterday. But that's not what the old year is about. That's not what bringing it to a conclusion means or gives understanding to. It's not about what we watch. It's not about what we do in and of itself as much as the example we live. And so as I was thinking through this last week about what I have done and how I have been, I decided to come in this morning and do a lesson that I was told a long time ago. Don't preach a lesson that can come off showing you're weak or talk about your weaknesses. And I got to thinking about that this week, and I thought, if a congregation knew the preacher had weaknesses, how much better is it for them to know how to rally around him and how to help him and how to support him, just as he's trying to do with the congregation. And so as I got to the point of putting this into PowerPoint and getting it ready for today, I got to thinking about what would I call this lesson? What would I entitle it? And it came to me last night as I was typing it in and getting it ready and making sure everything was finalized and everything. And I came up with to be better. I thought, what a great way to end the old year, realizing the weaknesses, realizing the issues, realizing where I am, and looking at the new year going, where can I go? What can I do? And what's it going to take to get there? And so I really contemplated about how I wanted to deliver this message, because I don't want this message to be about how bad I am or how weak I am or any of that, but more of my vision that I have for where I want to be at the close of 2023. Where do I want to be? What type of path is it going to take to get me from where I am to where I want to be? What type of relationship changes do I need to make in myself between me and my God? And I got to thinking a little bit more, and I thought, if I talk about those things that I'm looking at to better me, it might help the congregation to say, you know what? That's what I need, is to be able to find ways to be better myself. And so our encouragement this year is to find ways to be better. What is it going to take? I want to read Hebrews chapter 11, verses 4 through 7. I want to pay attention to verse 6. Hebrews chapter 11, starting in verse 4. By faith, Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it, he being dead still speaks. By faith, Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death, and was not found because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony, that he pleased God. But without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that God is, and that God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Now you'll note that it says he, but I put in what that he was. In verse 7, by faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world, and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. You ever notice that it said he condemned the world before? Can you go back to verse 6 again, please? But there is a strong word there. And it's fascinating to me that in verse 4, we see Abel. In verse 5, we see Enoch. And in verse 7, we see Noah. And all three of them say, by faith, Abel. By faith, Enoch. By faith, Noah. And verse 6, that is in the context of this, says, but without faith, it is impossible to please God. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Again, you can substitute the word he to say, for he who comes to God must believe that God is, and that God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek God. There's the key. So how do I want to take myself from being at the point I am, knowing the weaknesses I have, knowing who I am, knowing where I am, and be closer to God by the end of 2023? How do I do that? Well, it starts with a plan. And that plan involves some allowing in there. And that first allowing is that we need to allow God to be more effective in our life. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 through 10. Everybody knows verse 8. For by grace we are saved through faith. But I want to look at that section of verse 10 that's right there at the beginning of verse 10, where it says, notice, that we are his workmanship. Without God being effective in my life, I'm still where I've always been. I can't move from where I am to where I want to be unless I allow God to be able to move within my life so that God is able to do and be what I need for Him to do and be. And no, I'm not talking miraculous. I'm not talking some way out theory or understanding. I'm talking what the Bible teaches about how you and I need to be living in such a way that God is effective in the life we live. I mentioned it this morning in our class, talking about Peter. When they saw Jesus walking on water, it was Peter who said, Lord, if it is you, call me out. And it was by faith that Peter stepped out of that boat. He allowed the working of Christ to be effective in his life enough that he was willing to step out of a boat into a storm and actually walk toward him. It wasn't until he took his eyes off Christ, as I mentioned this morning, it wasn't until he took his eyes off Christ and started noticing the swells and realizing the wind was blowing as hard as it was that he began to sink. Jesus, God, was effective in the life of Paul. Because Paul realized that without God it was impossible to do anything. And if he had not been willing to listen when he was on the road to Damascus, his name never would have been called Paul. He would have remained Saul, and he would have went back to Jerusalem blind as a bat to never see again. Oh, well, preacher, you don't know that. Yes, I do. Because he was told, you go into Damascus and it will be told what you must do. And while he was in Damascus is when Ananias came to him, because Jesus told Ananias, go. Ananias went. You see the effectiveness that we can allow God to have in our lives if we're just willing to do it. Ananias, go. Wait a minute, Lord, isn't that the same Saul that's persecuting your church? Yes, but I have other things for him. Okay. And he goes. You see, we can't sit on the sideline and expect change. We have to be involved in the change. And God can take and say, I'm going to cleanse you of your sins. God can take and say, I'm going to do this with you. God can take and say, I'm going to help you in this area. But you need to understand that unless you're willing to get up and do something about it, it will not change. And that's where the majority of people are. They want it, but they don't want to do anything about it. I'm going to throw out a couple of names real quick, and I want you to think about them. Number one, Bill Gates. No, I didn't say these were going to be Christians, by the way. Number one, Bill Gates. Did Bill Gates become the multi-million-dollar man he is today by sitting on the sideline? Or was he involved in creating what has become one of the world's largest computer programs that runs the majority of computers in the world? He was involved in it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have got out of the basement. maybe we can think of some other individuals. We can look at the Rockefellers. We can look at just about anybody. Those that are where they are today, that have what they have today, it didn't come overnight. They had to work at it and build on it. And so through this year, if we want to be different, if we want to be better, we have to understand that we need to allow God to be more effective in our lives, but we also can't sit by and expect God to just give it to us. We've got to work on it. The second allowing is I must allow myself to understand I am weak. There's the issue that is underlining. I must allow myself to understand I am weak. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10. Paul's writing to the Corinthians here, and this is where the one area that a lot of people are so amazed about. This is the area where where Paul writing says that he had a thorn in the flesh. And he went to God 3 times and he said, "Take this thorn from me." And God said, "Paul, my grace is sufficient for you." The issue, the thorn in the flesh, is immaterial to the message that Paul is giving. The message Paul is giving is saying, I am weak, but God is strong. I cannot do it myself. I will fail every time I strike out on my own and say, "Okay, God, I got this. You just sit back and watch how good I am." Paul, in that area, context says that in his weakness, God made him strong. That he uses weakness for strength. I need to understand I'm weak. I need to understand I can't do it on my own. I need to understand that it's going to take a lot of work to make me better. I need to understand it. I'm weak. But I have God. Lean on the everlasting arms of Jesus. Jesus tells us in Matthew around chapter 11, "Come unto me, all that you labor, and I will give rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am humble." Think about it. God can take our weakness and He can make it strong. But we have to allow Him to. Again, it's that effort. We must allow Him to. We can't sit on the sideline. We must be involved. There's the game plan. Get involved. Third allowance. I must allow myself to be more effective in my work. One of the greatest difficulties I have in my life right now is where I am. That may sound like, to some people, what do you mean by that? There are so many things, so many ideas, so many missed opportunities that I have that bother me. In most of those cases, it's overlooked. Because as I try and I strive and I want to be, I have to realize that I still have to support and be there for my family too. And it's tough. Because I have a job, and then I have a work. Some will say, well, what's the difference? My heart's not in my job. My heart is in my work. And I have to understand, and I have to allow myself to realize, here again goes into that weakness, that I can only be in so many places at one time. But by being in other places at one time, I suffer at night, looking back going, but what if? And so I look at it and I think there's got to be an area in my life where I go, okay, I need more time to be effective here. I have to. Look at Philippians chapter 4. I want to read verses 8 and 9. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. The things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do. And the God of peace will be with you. Here is where it all comes together. Meditate and meditation on the things that are needed, that God has given, that helps us see the truth and the understanding. Larry asked me earlier this morning, so what would we want our goal for 2023 to be? And I answered him, I said, well, I think we need to continue keeping our just one more in attendance goal. But I'm going to put my goal, personal, out. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to need help for me to fulfill my goal. For the year of 2023, I want to be more effective for this congregation. For two reasons. Number one, there are lost souls around us that need God. And for number two, you deserve it. Now I'm going to need that help. And I'd like to see that by the time we move from today, the first day of January of 2023, to the last day, December 31st of 2023, I would love to see a difference in my spiritual well-being of you and where we are today toward the lost that need Jesus. That's my goal. Here's what we got to do very quickly. Number one, y'all don't know this yet, but y'all are about to. Ronnie and I are going to sit by, and we are going to get together in a couple of weeks, and we're going to make a game plan for the year. Once we have that game plan, it's going to be passed to the congregation so that the congregation knows the game plan. Because all of us working together are going to be what's going to change how people view our congregation and how we reach out to the community around us. That's the game plan. And I ask of you for 2023 to be as supportive and helpful as you can, moving from today to December 31st. And let's see where we are at the end of the year, not only numerically, but spiritually. You encouraging me, me encouraging you. I guarantee you we'll see a difference at the end of the year. For those of you that are not Christians, where are you? Do you have God included in your game plan? Do you have God included in how you want to live and in what you want to do in your life? Because if you don't, you're missing something dreadfully needed in life, and that is His salvation. And I plead with you, do something about it. Because if you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and you're willing to change from a life of sin to a life of righteousness, if you're willing to confess Him before men and willing to be immersed for the remission of your sins, there should be no reason why we can't do that right now and get you on the right path to change not only your life but the life of others. For those of us that are Christians, are we living it? Are we being it? Or do we need to do something about it? Only you can answer that question. I can't answer it for you. But I ask that you do something if you need to. Step out and let us help right now. While together we stand and sing this invitation song.